Okay, two things I'd like to say about Cuba, then I'd like to say something else. Um, First of all, I'm no fan of communism, but I don't think we can attribute all the economic problems Cuba has been having to communism. Um, Certainly, a very significant source of economic trouble with Cuba has been its relationship with the United States. And the fact that prior to the revolution, Cuba was very much dependent on the United States for tourism and for a number of uh, industries. So after the revolution, those relationships were pretty much cut off, and with deleterious effects, you know. Um, so attributing it all to communism, I think, is a mistake. Um, the second thing I want to say about Cuba is related to the size of the country, and humans evolved as a social species, evolved within tribes, and humans are very attuned to function well within societies that are about the size of a tribe. Okay, and that there are lots of social interactions that people engage in that um, that create a cohesiveness to society. Political systems are only necessary once the size of the society grows beyond a certain scale, because what you find is that there are no systems in place for identifying or punishing rule breakers, defectors, that people who are uncooperative or parasitic to society are not identified or dealt with. Okay, so there are legal boundaries that are established with political systems in order to keep society functional, and so that people who would prey upon, be parasitic or defectors to society do not overwhelm society. Okay, so it's necessary to have a political system. To me, that sort of implies that the smaller a country is, the less important its political system is. If you notice a country like the Soviet Union, very large country, very sensitive to its political system, had lots and lots of resources, far more than Cuba does, but it collapsed because of the size of that society and the fact that it is much more sensitive to its political system. Cuba is very small, and they seem to be going fairly strong. You know, they don't seem to be under any sort of imminent collapse or anything. You know, Castro admitting that there are problems with communism. Obviously, there are problems with communism. Okay, but I think for a small country, the form of government is less important, and that we see smaller countries. You know, I guess the ultimate tribal community that's communist would be like a kibbutz or some other commune, and those societies work fairly well. Okay, it's because they very rarely have to go to legal boundaries. That most of the time the behavior is kept in check by the social interactions, and that they very rarely have to test the legal boundaries of the system. With the larger society, the legal boundaries are tested continually, that they're relied upon. Okay, so a larger society is much more sensitive to the political system. The second thing I wanted to talk about was this idea of some of the conservative leaders talking about the idea that pointing out class distinctions is somehow tantamount to declaring class warfare. Well, class distinctions are real. I think that the reason why conservatives want to deny them is not that class war isn't occurring or that there isn't a class struggle. They want to deny it because they don't want the lower classes fighting back. Right? It's natural that anyone in a position of power and privilege would want to eliminate all potential sources of competition. But what we see with the right wing, what they're doing now is they're trying to establish a precedence of property rights over individual civil liberty rights, that property is more important than liberty. Okay, and we're seeing that continually, and the reason for this is that they want to establish a permanent, privileged upper class that owns most of the property and that governs because it has the property. Now, there are a couple of problems with this. First of all, it's unjust. That's people feel an injustice when they're ruled over by people who are perhaps less competent than they are, when they feel as though they're trapped within their social strata, that there's no escape. The privileged are placed into positions of power, but they don't necessarily suffer any consequences from any bad decisions they make. And what we find with a privileged class is that they tend to become incompetent. All right, so for a well-functioning society, we want to have leadership positions based upon merit and based upon earning that position within society, not based upon being born into the right family with enough property and privilege and power that they can basically get away with whatever and still end up to be president of the United States, like George Bush. Okay, so George Bush is probably the poster boy for a privileged class that is incompetent. George Bush was very incompetent. He failed at just about every business venture he tried, and he was constantly bailed out by his friends, his family and friends. So he is the poster boy for incompetent privileged class, as far as I'm concerned. So one of the things, a lot of the libertarians, a lot of the conservatives want to say that capitalism is the thing that drove the American success story, and I beg to differ. Capitalism may have played some part in it, but only as far as it provides equal opportunity. And I think equal opportunity was the key concept that made America great in the previous century, and the thing that's slipping away from us now. Equal opportunity in terms of providing people with education, making sure that markets are fair and open, not necessarily free, okay? Because free implies that if there's a cabal of large corporations, they're free to own and control that market. And that's what we're finding to a very large extent. They're trying to own and control the markets. And it's anti-competitive behavior. And they engage in it all the time. It's only natural for power to want to eliminate its competition. All right? So the cornerstone of the American success, I believe, was equal opportunity. It provides the greatest sense of social justice, and it provides the greatest amount of competence in leadership. Now, if you were to ask me what's wrong with communism, the idea of a classless society, I think, is the principal thing wrong with communism. I think it's the principal thing wrong with what the conservatives are saying, that pointing out class distinctions is tantamount to class warfare. I don't think denying class distinction is in anyone's interest. I think we want to embrace the idea that we want to have classes in the United States. In any economic system, there's the need to have classes there are people who work harder, there are people who study harder, that classes are of benefit and of use to society, that we are in need of leadership, okay? But the question is how is that leadership determined? Is it determined by people who start on a more or less level playing field and earn their way into society? Or is it determined by people who happen to be born to a family with lots of property, privilege, and power, and they're able to buy their way into positions of authority? I think equal opportunity, the thing that made America great, was the former. And to the extent we slip into the latter, we fall upon hard times. If you look at probably the single most significant thing in common between the period of the Great Depression and the recession we're in now, it is the disparity of wealth in this country and the attempts of the upper class to establish a permanent position of power, privilege, and authority of their families over the rest of us. And that's the thing that's wrong with this country. And that's the thing I have against libertarians and laissez-faire capitalism. So, thanks for listening. Hopefully this didn't go over 10 minutes. Thanks. Bye.